This segment brought to you by Kansas Regenerative Medicine Center. Your stem cells, your health, your life.
Welcome back to Ag AM in Kansas, and I am with Sarah Landcaster at the 2020 Midwest Cover Crops Conference talking about weed suppression from cover crops.
Now, a few factors playing into or affecting weed suppression are days, family, and biomass. So you kind of discussed that, and you had some trials at K-State.
Right. We did have some trials at K-State. They were focused on how can cover crops help us to manage particularly herbicide-resistant Palmer Amaranth and water hemp. And the key takeaway, so the treatments they used in those studies, they had row crop cultivation, they had row spacing of soybean and grain sorghum, they had cover crops. They used a winter wheat cover crop, and then they had chemical weed control. Okay, so when we looked at how that winter wheat suppressed weeds, so when we look at those management factors and we think about row crop cultivation, for example, it had very little effect on weed management when averaged across the other treatments. When we consider row spacing, it was pretty variable in terms of the response of the pigweed growth to row spacing of sorghum and soybean. It was very dependent on production environment. When we think about cover crops, it's also dependent on environment because those cover crops are changing the soil conditions in which your weeds are germinating. So in years that were, for example, particularly dry, cover crops actually sort of helped our pigweeds a little bit. In years where it was average or maybe wet, we had better suppression of the pigweeds with those cover crops. Now, the good thing about these particular studies is they included some effective herbicide programs. And so if you find yourself in a situation where your cover crop doesn't control your weeds maybe the way you want it to, we still have those herbicides as an option in some situations.
Now, you kind of went into this, but weed size does make a big difference.
When we think about cover crop suppression and weed size, one of the most important things that changes is how long it takes those weeds to achieve a height where they're difficult to control with the herbicides. So because those cover crops can change the environment in which those seeds are germinating, often weeds will grow slower in a cover crop than they would otherwise. That slower growth gives producers a bigger window of time where they can go in and effectively use herbicides and make herbicide applications that are in accordance with label recommendations of that 4 to 6 inch weed size.
Well, a big thank you to Sarah Landcaster for being at the conference. I'm Britton Rucker, and this is Ag AM in Kansas.